The intro, and thanks everyone for being here. Tonight, I'm going to discuss this restoration of Northern California bull kelp forests. It's a partnership-based approach. Oh, geez. Okay, so this report was submitted in May of this year. It explored kelp restoration in the Northern California bull kelp forests via commercial hand harvest of purple sea urchins. A lot of work and time and energy from many different people went into this 2-year project, and I'm very excited to discuss the results with you this evening. So this project was really unique in the fact that it was the first of its kind collaboration between the state of California, nonprofit organizations, commercial fishing and diving industries, and community members. It was highly collaborative, and everyone on this very long list has been instrumental to help make this project run smoothly. A bit of background. So kelp forests are very important ecosystem ecologically and economically. Ecologically, kelp forests supply ample food, ample habitat for many different marine species. They protect our coastline from wave disturbances and erosion, and they support nutrient and carbon cycling. Economically, kelp forests provide recreational activities for community members, but also it supports a tourism industry, provides recreational and commercial fisheries and food. Specifically, the fisheries here in Fort Bragg and Mendocino on the North Coast. The fisheries that kelp forests support are rockfish, sea urchin, abalone, salmon, crab, all of it. Kelp forests also provide cultural and educational experiences. Here on the North Coast, our dominant canopy forming kelp is bull kelp. Here is an image depicting bull kelp ecosystem. When the ocean conditions are ideal, there's a balanced community structure with a sustainable trophic hierarchy. So we don't have sea otters here in Northern California anymore. So the sunflower star serves as the main predator to kelp grazers like urchins. And the interaction of these 3 species, bull kelp, urchins, and sunflower stars, is really important to help keep a balanced ecosystem. But our ecosystem is changing and it's directly affecting this balance. So the Pacific Ocean experienced a marine heat wave in 2014 to 2016 and extending into 2019. Higher marine temperatures can affect a species' ability to grow, to reproduce, changes migration patterns and food availability. And at the same time, Seastar wasting disease, we got hit with Seastar wasting disease. So sea stars along the North Coast experience a widespread die-off. And this disease isn't fully understood, but we do know it creates this proliferation of bacteria on the surface of the sea star, which essentially causes the star to suffocate. We do still see infected stars. I actually went diving this morning and saw an ochre star with wasting, which was unfortunate, but we still see it out there. Unfortunately, the sunflower star, the main predator of urchins, were severely affected by this disease, creating an extreme mortality event in a short amount of time, putting them on the IUCN list as critically endangered. So here, Reef collected data from Mendocino and Sonoma Coast displays this crash in sunflower star populations due to the sea star wasting disease. So on the x-axis on the bottom, we have time in years. And then on the Y, we have purple urchin density number in a 60 meter squared survey. And then on the other Y, we have sunflower star density, a number of individuals per 60 meter squared survey. We have purple urchins in purple, naturally, and then sunflower stars in gray. So we see this drastic decrease come 2013-14 in sunflower star populations, the main predator of urchins. And so associated, we see this purple urchin increase because they don't have a predator and they're partying. So the series of stressors like marine heat wave and loss of a predator. Those together resulted in an increase in urchin populations. And now there's just more mouths to feed in the system. This graph displays Reef Check collected data from Sonoma and Mendocino counties as well, and it's set up very similar to the previous graph with time down here on the X, and then purple urchin density and bull kelp density on the Y, and then bull kelp in the brown line and purple urchins in the purple line. So warming waters and grazing pressure, you could really see that decrease in kelp from 2013, 14, 15, and that big crash in kelp, and then that associated increase in purple urchins. And in 2018, where this data set ends, is really when we started having the conversation around, like, we see what's happening, like we need to do something about this. And we started seeing urchin barrens everywhere. And this is a photo from a Reef Check survey site in Mendocino. It's pretty common to see up here. Low diversity, high purple urchin density, no kelp, and they're widespread, and they have persisted with really no indication of full kelp recovery. So given these severe disruptions to the coastal ecosystem, the economy, our coastal communities, the protection and restoration of California's kelp forests has emerged as like a top priority for our California state resource managers. And one such approach to kelp restoration is large scale removal efforts of urchins, which up to this point hasn't been scientifically investigated in Northern California. So to address this data gap and to actively restore bull kelp, Reef Check was awarded $617,000 from the Ocean Protection Council to develop, test, and study a novel collaboration approach for bull kelp restoration. And these removals were conducted locally in Mendocino by local commercial urchin divers at 2 sites to address some research questions that we have. Our first research question: can commercial divers be coordinated to reduce urchin densities to less than 2 per meter squared? And can they maintain this urchin density at sites along the North Coast? So this 2 urchin per meter squared density is like a theoretical threshold that kelp practitioners around the world accept as the highest density in an area that will still allow kelp to grow. So we're starting over here well above 2, and can we get it to 2? And if we do, does kelp grow? What is the cost and effort, logistics, and time invested to achieve this density and maintain it over time? And how does kelp density change following removals compared to unrestored control sites? So first thing we did is we had to choose our restoration sites. Like, where are we going to do this? Next, recruit divers, and then determine how we're going to do this, and then monitor the removal process in water and also on land on dockside, which I'll get into that later. Monitor the ecosystem before removals, during removals, and after removals. We chose a site based off forth in this Sonoma Mendocino bull kelp recovery plan put together by the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary and CDFW staff. The criteria we considered for this project was proximity to kelp patches that persisted through the marine heat wave, suggesting potential genetic resilience to warming waters. Also, those kelp patches could act as a valuable spore source to help seed the restoration site. Natural barriers like sand expanses or cliffs, natural choke points, and that's to reduce or eliminate urchin encroachment. Site similarity between restoration and control sites for data comparisons. Logistical factors: the site must be easily accessed by commercial divers and research divers, and it needs to be close to a harbor so urchins can be offloaded safely. and areas that have a history of recreational use. Based off that criteria, we chose 2 sites in Mendocino. Noyo Harbor, or like Noyo North, is our restoration site in pink up at the top, and Noyo South is our control site in green. And then in July of 2021, a year later than Noyo, Albion Cove, which Albion is the restoration site in pink and the green Dark Gulch control site in green. So we developed an application process for interested participants. There ended up being a really strong interest from the local commercial community here in Fort Bragg. There's a history of red urchin diving here, so there's already an established fleet, and they were very interested in participating. And so to provide, so 16 applicants applied, and we accepted all of them. And to provide equal opportunity to all of them, a defined amount of work days were allocated and distributed amongst all of them evenly. So they all had the same amount of days to work. They were required to work for 4 hours underwater in buddy pairs for a set daily rate. And most divers use the hand harvest method by just picking urchins off the rock or using rakes to rake them off. To conduct the actual removals, we created a gridded system at both restoration sites. So Reef Check, we deployed this benthic line. You can kind of see it, lead line, and you can see it in blue down here in the map. And then again, it's here in the picture on the left. And that provided easy navigation and a base for our grid system. And then bolts were installed like every 10 meters along that line. And PVC markers were used to signify what number they were. So as you see here, there's 3 holes drilled in there, and visibility can be pretty bad in the North Coast. So we'll have to, somebody be diving, trying to figure out what bolt it was, and we'd use those numbers as Braille sometimes. But this helps create like sections for the grid. So as you can see the grid system in yellow on the right, these lanes went north and south off that line. And they created sections, or what we called cells, for the commercial divers to remove in between. And that ensured systematic removals, and it also allowed us to quantify and track progress and effort and density in each cell. Cool. So we had set that all up in the first couple months of the project, and then we started removals. So at Noyo, our first restoration site, the bulk of removals were from July 2020 to November 2020, totaling to 26,535 pounds of urchin from a fleet of 6 commercial divers, and there was 2 divers per boat, so 12 divers. This was a huge push from the commercial divers. They really rocked it. They were able to work collectively and to like sweep that site and like clear the cells, and also kind of remove kind of in the shallow area. After the initial bulk removals, Reef Check staff, we'd go out and conduct quality control dives. So we took urchin and kelp densities in each one of those cells. And if we found a cell that had like higher than desired densities, we would send the commercial guys back out to that cell for maintenance. And so from March 2021 to August 2021, divers removed about 5,000 pounds of urchins from those certain cells and areas for maintenance removals. And really what we see here is that with a higher initial removal effort in like that 2020, commercial divers can reach that target density and then maintain it over time into 2021 with lower relative effort. I skipped a slide. There we go. Albion removals. So Albion was our second restoration site, and removals started a year later than Noyo, and they were conducted from July 2021 to December 2021 with a total initial removal of like 13,609 pounds. And this was only with 2 vessels, so 4 divers, which was still a huge push for 4 guys to do this. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the project had a later than expected start, we all know the story. We only have 1 season of removals here, and only a few months of survey data. And unfortunately, that's not really enough to analyze results. And so results are still outstanding for Albion. So moving forward, when I get to the results section, I'm just going to be talking about Noyo. So out of all the urchins that were removed, they were all landed in Noyo Harbor at 3 different processing facilities. There was a grand total of 45,118 pounds removed from 2 sites over the course of the project. Most of those urchins were used for compost. Some were used by community members to experiment with natural dye or art projects or pavement, like the harbor. Noyo Harbor is, if you've been there before, you can see it's just crushed up urchins everywhere. It's kind of been a thing for a long time. And we had like this community aspect of the 2 community volunteers, and 2 interns from the local Mendocino High School helped collect urchin biometric data and what we called dockside sampling. Samples were taken like immediately after urchins were landed, so they were fresh. And these methods of the dockside sampling were adapted from UC Davis Bodega Bay Marine Laboratory. We collected data points for over 8,500 urchins to characterize urchin size frequency of the urchins coming out, morphometrics, disease presence, and unintended bycatch at each restoration site. There was a total of 38 dockside sampling days, and 24 of those we had community members participate. Our collected data provide that commercial divers were removing all size, someone's drawing on there, removing all size classes of urchins. So there was no removal bias, and by the commercial divers, they were being thorough and getting everything. Urchin disease was not significant, and it didn't aid in decreasing the urchin populations inside our restoration site. And bycatch was minimal, with most bycatch being drift algae, like the red algae you see in my hand in the photo. So dockside data was used to characterize the urchins that were coming out of the water, and to characterize how urchin density, kelp density, subtidal community composition changed over the course of the project. Reef check divers conducted subtidal surveys at Noyo and Albion and their control sites. Surveys were conducted before removals, during removals seasonally, and after removals. And our surveys followed the kelp forest monitoring protocol described in the Reef Check manual, with a few slight variations. So for those of you Reef Check volunteers out there, we did not subsample or have a size requirement for urchins, so we counted everything. And I'm pretty sure we counted a total of probably up to 100,000 urchins. I started like dreaming in purple after a while. Yeah, but again, we only have survey data a couple months for Albion, so I'm going to continue. All right. Okay, this is a graph displaying density of purple urchin in Noyo. So I'll walk you through the graph really quickly. We have time on the bottom here, x-axis are seasonal surveys, and the y, we have the density of urchins and number of individuals per meter squared. In blue line, we have the control sites. Don't get too ahead of myself. And then gray, we have the restoration site. This blue dotted line represents when restoration began. And then this dark dotted line represents that threshold, that like 2 urchins per meter squared that we were trying to get below. So removals in 2020, summer of 2020, density in the control and restoration sites were not significantly different from one another, but they were both well above that, that threshold line. As removals progressed, urchin densities in the control site stayed above that threshold and also increased a bit, while densities in the restoration site steadily decreased over time. And our post-removal survey in fall of 2021, we ended with a 0.9 urchins per meter squared. So below that threshold, which is awesome. And that's great. That's exactly what we were trying to do. The commercial divers went out and killed it. But what we also really want to know is what happened to the kelp. So this is our Noyo bull kelp data, and the graph is set up very similar to the urchin graph previously. So we have below, we have our time seasonal surveys on the bottom. And then on the Y, we have our total bull kelp density of number per meter squared. Oops. And we have our dotted line is where when restoration began. Gray line is our restoration, and blue line is our control site. So pre-removal surveys in summer of 2020 showed little to no bull kelp present at the control and restoration sites respectively. We see slight variations in fall 2020 and spring 2021, but in summer 2021, that's really when you see that jump in kelp densities at the restoration site, which is significantly more than the kelp that we observed at the control site. So bull kelp is an annual, and it starts to grow in spring, peak growth in summer, and then it starts to die off and get ripped out by storms come fall. So that's why we see that dip in fall 2021. It's just kind of outliving its life cycle. Yeah. Now, some water first. To evaluate the effect of removals on urchin density and kelp density, we compared surveys from the summer of 2020 before removals, and then again in summer 2021 after removals. The graph on the left is purple urchins, set up the exact same way as the other graphs. And then the graph on the right is bull kelp and set up the same as the other. This before and after analysis shows urchin densities were significantly reduced by summer 2021 compared to the control site. It also shows that bull kelp was present at the restoration site at significantly higher densities than at the control site compared to the summer of 2020. So yes, we saw kelp at Noyo. Kelp grew there, which was awesome. I took this cute little photo. Was very happy to see our babies on the site. And we answered a lot of our research questions, or all of them. We determined that commercial divers can be coordinated to reduce and maintain purple urchin target densities in Northern California. We determined the best practices and the lessons learned for commercial restoration on the North Coast. And kelp grew in low purple urchin densities in restoration areas compared to the unrestored control sites. And this project really addressed a lot of important questions about implementation of bull kelp restoration, specifically here on the North Coast, but there's more to explore. Some key recommendations for building upon this work and for further advancing understanding of bull kelp restoration as a tool to build resilience in Northern, is one to establish and expand upon community-based frameworks for restoration. So this was a novel approach with a lot of different stakeholders, community members, state organizations, nonprofit organizations, commercial industry, and further work should be done to identify other opportunities to engage and leverage an even broader group of stakeholders. Support long-term monitoring and maintenance of existing restoration sites. Initial results from the project indicate that there was regrowth of some bull kelp, but continued monitoring and maintenance of those sites will provide valuable insight to outcomes and lessons learned down the road. And this project addressed key questions regarding the implementation, but many still remain. So, for example, like how can spore dispersal guide restoration efforts, or how can we use other restoration tools to enhance hand harvest? And so sharing all of this and our lessons learned will facilitate a step forward in like the global understanding of kelp restoration techniques, and future work and ongoing restoration should be supported. And if you want to read further into the report, and you can locate it on our website at reefcheck.org under the kelp restoration tab. You can read the full thing. It's there for you. And thank you for listening to me tonight and being interested in kelp restoration in this project. I really appreciate your time here. And I'll stop talking and let you ask questions. Actually, not yet. I'm sorry. Hold that thought. I want to thank everybody who participated in this project. Our project partners listed here. Thank you for organizing, managing, troubleshooting, and dedicating so much time to this project. Thank you to all the commercial divers. You did an incredible job. You know, they typically don't like go for purples, they're red urchin divers, but they had to change their methods and adapt, and they did so well and killed it. And they spent 776 hours underwater removing urchin, which is a lot of time under cold, dark water. Their knowledge is invaluable, and we could not have accomplished so much without them. Thank you to our volunteers. Your hard work on guide was amazing. 85 Urchins dissected, and it didn't always smell the best in the height of summer on those docks. So thanks for doing that with us. Thank you for the processors for letting us offload the urchins and store your urchins on your dock. Really appreciate that. And thank you staff for putting in over 300 dives on the restoration site, and for over 100 miles of surface swimming. Buns of steel, right? So thanks for listening. Now is your time for questions. Thank you.